yourself. Have nothing to do with profane myths and old wives' tales. Train yourself in godliness. Also, somewhere in here it talked about comparing the amount of time we spend on learning about God or doing God's will compared to everything else we do in our day, which would go along with that idea that perhaps we need to think about advancing where we are in our faith, which, going back to the purpose, to rediscover the holy habits and godly practices that build Christian character and prepare us for faithful leadership in the church. So what would be a holy habit or a godly practice?
Prayer,
Yes?
worship,
Yes?
Studying the scriptures.
Yes?
Bible study, daily devotion, Bible study. Love for others.
Yes.
Do no harm, do good.
Yes, there
Stay
we
in love
go.
with God.
There we go. They actually brought that up, said it was the same thing, and I thought, oh, it was at the end of the teacher's manual. And I went to pick my little book up, you know, that little thing this size, can't find it. So then I sat down and tried to remember. Do no good, do no,
Do no harm,
do no harm,
do good.
do good, love God.
Stay in love with God.
Stay in love with God. It's amazing how those catchphrases, does it really cover the span of what we need to think about and do? I suppose it does. Is it too simplistic?
Well, I think we need simple in our lives because everything's become so complicated.
True.
Keeping it simple is nice for a change.
Yeah, true.
I think sometimes the line between doing no harm and doing good is blurred.
Maybe it wouldn't hurt to do just a little.
Sometimes if you give your opinion about something, are you doing harm or are you doing good? You know, it's a fine line there.
So do these words of Paul to Timothy have importance to us today? And excuse me for doing this because it's such a wide open, bad question. How should we take this to heart? How can we take this to heart, perhaps? How about that?
All the way.
By watching our speech, watching our love, watching our faith, purity, and conduct. What about purity? That isn't something we talk about in church, is it? Or is it? Don's frowning. Purity. Is there another word? I could look it up in my head. I brought my Bible because it does not interpret it exactly the same.
You know, there's a lot of things we don't talk about. I remember a preacher in some big church somewhere. He came down with a thing that had a sign on it. He turned around where the congregation couldn't see it. He says, this morning we're going to talk about something that's not heard of in our churches today. He turned it around and said, sin. We have to be careful what we're talking about.
And we also don't want to point fingers at other people when, at least I know, I certainly have plenty of pointing to do it myself.
Yes.
And that goes back to conduct and I suppose all of the others. We want not to be doing this when it needs to be this.
Well, if you love your neighbor, you won't be doing that.
I do love my neighbor.
That-
I'm lucky, aren't I?
I think one of the, as you watch some of the things that's going on right now, it don't make any difference what side of the fence you're on, but when you talk about immigration and the immigrants that are coming across and so on, and you see, yes, I understand about people that need jobs, don't get me wrong, but there's the way some people talk about it, it leaves a lot to be desired, in my opinion.
Some people are afraid that they can't compete with them, is how I look at it. And maybe that's true, maybe not. Does anybody have any other, okay. On to Timothy's gift, and it refers, but doesn't specifically talk about Galatians, and where Paul listed some of the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. What do you suppose Timothy's gift was? If it was just one of those? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Paul was writing to complain about the conditions that Timothy was facing and to strengthen him at this point, I believe. According to the teacher's manual, it was all kinds of uproar and people trying to go in different directions. And Paul was very unhappy about it and was encouraging Timothy to stay the course, what he told him. So I would say he was certainly faithful to Paul, for one thing.
I think he's admonishing him to stay true to all those things, to maintain the course that he's on, not
Yes.
let the naysayers and others cause him to deviate.
Some of it because he was so young, they were,
Yeah, we can say 30 is young, huh?
well, yeah, young.
During that time, there was a lot of competition with things like with Gnosticism,
Yes?
and it was kind of cutting inroads in a lot of competition. Hard to get the story of the Christ out. People were struggling to understand and separate the two.
It's hard to imagine a world where there wasn't the Christianity that we have today. It's slipping and we're losing ground, but it's there. And we were raised, I suppose all of us were raised in Christian families. I know I was, and I'm sure you were too, or we wouldn't be here likely. It really is something that goes not entirely on, but it's something that needs, you don't just make I'm going to call it a mental decision to become a Christian by reading. I think that you know people who touch you, it seems to me. Now that may not be entirely true,